Thanks everyone for coming back to our next edition of Econ Talks. Gareth, we've seen the US election. Finally, the networks have called it. We were left in limbo for a few days waiting for a bit of a feel for whether or not Trump had pulled off this massive comeback from behind, or if Biden was going to sort of meet those expectations. Did take a little bit longer, but the networks have now called it for Biden. I mean, what's the general outlook in that sense? I mean, from your point of view?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to get some of that uncertainty out of the way. Finally, with the result coming through, of course, still don't quite know how things are going to pan out there with the sort of legal challenges that the Trump team seems to be bringing forward. But yeah, look, for me, I think it's a key when you look across the Senate and the Congress and the presidency. It's not like we're going to have Democrats all the way there. So there's going to be, I still think, in terms of financial markets, they'll be pretty settled because it's going to be more or less status quo. Very hard to make any significant changes in terms of policy there in America. And look, let's be honest, I don't know whether Biden was necessarily going to be that radical anyway in terms of policy direction. He's shown over his many decades in politics more of an incrementalist. So I think financial markets will be relatively settled. Of course, it does potentially change the game a little bit in terms of the US's approach to foreign policy and dealing with other countries and some of the agreements that Trump has pulled out of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that geopolitical situation is going to be quite an interesting one to watch. There's a lot of world leaders that have started to congratulate President-elect Biden. China and Russia apparently notably absent from that list of getting in touch. So, some tensions and thinking around what is likely to play out there on the international stage. But I think what you're also likely to see is that the US policy direction turns a little bit more towards what people had expected. The last 4 years, a little bit of a blip, if you will, relative to that. A feeling that free trade is very much back on the agenda. Biden is poised to bring the US back into the Paris Climate Agreement, into the likes of the World Trade Organization, all of those sort of mechanisms, which will at least provide a bit more of a firm and stable base. So, from an investor point of view, people are probably going to like that sort of return to normal. You're absolutely right, though, and I think the Congress is critical, right? The Senate and the House. The Democrats lost a few in the House, more than they expected, but are still managing to cling on. Senate looks very uncertain at the moment, though. You didn't have the sort of the Democratic blue wave that swept through the presidency to start with, but not the Senate races either. They've picked up a few and they've lost one. The big change, I guess, from the Senate position is that you've got two runoff races coming through in early next year. So, if you will, things are just on hold. And you've also got, at the time of us speaking at least, the Alaska seat, which is still a little bit more in toss-up territory. Just a bit of a feeling there that the independent runner there might come in and sneak it off the Republicans. So from that point of view, you're right. There is still going to be that gridlock a little bit in Washington, which will limit that policy effectiveness. I guess so from an investor point of view as well, and from that feeling of what's likely to come next from a global economic point of view. We'd already seen that the US global growth expectations were starting to stabilise a bit more. People were feeling like things might be holding up better into the next year or so. And I think with the likes of Biden coming in and providing what sounds like a pretty comprehensive and cohesive approach to it, you'd expect those sort of numbers might hold up, trying to get the virus under control and keeping the economy running as much as possible. So, look, still some uncertainty ahead, but at least the course or pathway of direction seems to be somewhat more stable.
Yeah, and look, from New Zealand's point of view, I mean, you mentioned trade. I don't think that Biden is going to be, a wholesale free trade guy, and that wouldn't be what we'd expect out of the Democrats anyway. But let's think about that in terms of New Zealand's, trading potential going forward from here. Do you see sort of any improvements in that relationship or trading flows with the US over time?
I think that there will be this want from the US to try and reach out to some of those partners who they have been very close with previously, who might have felt a little bit offhand during the Trump administration, just in terms of trade turned America for America, bugger the rest sort of thing. And so I think what we're going to see now is possibly a bit more of a conversation over, well, maybe it's not a full free trade agreement with the US, but hey, are there additional areas that we can try to move through? Are there places that we can collaborate a bit more? And so I think that there is probably a bit more potential coming through. The biggest one though is that just by having a bit more of a semblance of stable trading relationships across the world, New Zealand sort of has more potential to sort of move into markets without too much disruption. We were making some good gains in the short term out of the US-China trade war, but once that settled down, New Zealand could well have been in a more compromised position. This just provides a much more stable base, I think.
Yeah, so probably, good thoughts and potential over the medium term. There's still obviously COVID a big limiting factor in terms of those trade flows in the near term over the next 12 months, I would have said at least.
Absolutely. No, supply and demand issues are going to continue to persist, right? What do overseas buyers want, and how much are we able to ship over there? More importantly, how much can we get into New Zealand? And we've continued to talk about and hear about those sort of supply chain issues. So, yeah, we'll definitely keep those ones in mind. But I think from a market's point of view, they're happy enough that there's a result. They're happy enough that there's sort of no real strong sort of progressive or regressive lean either way. Things do seem to be sort of taking that middle ground, which is I think going to be relaxing for the markets after a pretty roller coaster year. Thanks, Gareth. Always good to chat, and I'll catch you and everyone else on the next edition of Econ Talks.